Start today's day with a discussion on art and craft of fiction by Chandigarh writers. Our panelists for this session are three very well-known Chandigarh writers who have written novels in English to explore the art and craft of their fiction. Ms. Neel Kamalpuri, Ms. Manju Jaitka, and Dr. Suchita Malik. The moderator for the discussion would be Mr. Vivek Atre. Mr. Atre is a civil servant and is well known for the medals which appear in various newspapers. His protagonist, Bunny, has featured in 2 books penned by him. He is also known as a bright anchor in literary unit. Ms. Neel Kamalpuri made a debut in the world of fiction with her novel, The Patiala Portrait. Her second novel, Remembering to Forget, is based in Ludhiana and recalls the very sensitive times of Punjab in troubled times. She is a very popular English teacher in Government College for Girls, Sector 11, Chandigarh.
Ms. Manju Jaitka is the chairperson of the Chandigarh Sahitya Academy and has organized many significant literary events. She is also a poet and novelist who has 3 novels to her credit. She teaches English in Punjab University. Ms. Suchita Malik teaches English in the Government College for Boys, Sector 11, Chandigarh. But her lifeline is writing. After writing 2 novels on the lives of civil servants, she chose a wider canvas in her recent novel, Women Extraordinaire. We request our honorable panelists to please come on the stage and start up with the session, Art and Craft of Fiction.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here bright and early this morning on a working day. I noticed that most of you are scared of us, so you're sitting suitably far away. If you like, some of you can come a little ahead. This is not a classroom. We're not going to ask you too many questions. In fact, you are the ones going to be asking questions at the end, so you don't need to be terrified. Thank you very much for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the craft of fiction in this morning session. And this is the second day of the Chandigarh Literature Festival. I'm very glad to see very bright, enthusiastic faces. Hopefully, the writers on the stage will have something for you that will stick with you somewhere and will inspire you to write something yourself and be writers, authors, if you're not already authors. Some young people in school are authors these days, so I wouldn't be surprised if one of you or 2 of you are authors already. So I'd like to welcome the panelists, Mrs. Suchita Malik, Neel Kamalpuri ji, and Manju Jaitka ji. They are all renowned personalities of Chandigarh, multiple time authors, and they have been on stage with me and without me on various occasions, so we know each other more on stage than off stage. But just before this, when we didn't see any audience at about 10 a.m., we were sitting outside, the 4 of us, and wondering whether we're going to have the discussion amongst ourselves. But it's lovely to be here and having the discussion before you. So we're talking about fiction here, as opposed to non-fiction. And those of you who haven't read books are not permitted, so everyone should read books. And books are something which give us joy. What types of books give us joy is something which everyone has to decide for himself or herself. For me, I grew up initially the very traditional way, reading Enid Blyton's. I don't know whether boys are supposed to read them, but I did. Then I read Hardy Boys and even read Nancy Drews for some reason. Then I read Agatha Christie's and I read P.G. Wodehouse. Maybe I graduated to P.G. Wodehouse. And of course, I skipped Mills and Boons. I didn't read them. My generation was reading them, but only the ladies. And why I skipped Mills and Boons, Professor Jedka asks, is because perhaps I found some more interesting books of the genre and read those. Of course, I read Arthur Haley, I read this and that, and lots of stuff. But P.G. Wodehouse stuck with me somewhere. And when I started writing, and I am a two-book author, I also am influenced by P.G. Wodehouse, though nowhere near able to write the way he did. And I also try to bring in a little humor into my fiction. But first, I'm going to ask a few leading questions to the eminent panel. They're all professors. I'm feeling a bit intimidated sitting here. And they are very well versed with the art of writing, creative writing, English especially. So my questions to you, and we'll go starting with Professor Manju and then Neel Kamalji and then ma'am, and then back to me, are the following. Just a couple of questions. How difficult is it to create a work of fiction? To imagine something from scratch, to put it together into the form of a book, to weave in characters, situations, stories, and then to put together a product which is readable and credible. So that's my first, slightly complicated questions, but basically it means, how do you write fiction? And number two, how much of your fiction, specifically your fiction, you can talk about your own books, how much of your fiction relates to your own life and your experiences and your real life situations, real life people? Have you been able to bring them into your books with names changed? Or are you the sort who creates people out of nothing and situations out of nothing and imagines things like Enid Blyton would have, or someone who totally creates a situation unknown to him or her? So these are the two questions. Over to Professor Manju Jedka.
Thank you, Vivek. And before I begin, I would like to thank all the young people and younger people out here for making it to this venue. The question that Vivek has asked is just a single question, two questions actually, but the answers would involve so much of material, so many points of view that it can easily stretch to 2 hours. However, I will try and answer as briefly as I can. The first question that he put relates to the craft of fiction. How do you write fiction? How do you go about it? And the second, to autobiography, how does it enter your work? Now, in the first place, I know most of you here are fond of literature, otherwise you would not be here. All of us have stories within us, and all of us have the desire to narrate those stories. When we want to sit down and write, we have to decide what kind of a story do I wish to tell? There are different genres, and what is the genre that appeals to you? What is the genre that interests you? So once you are decided on that, then you start thinking of the story. Once you are sure what genre you want to write, whether you want to write a historical novel or a romance or a thriller or a whodunit or a fantasy novel or a book for children or a science fiction, whatever, then you start thinking of a storyline. Think of a storyline. You know, just as you cannot build a house without the plan, the blueprint, similarly, you cannot write a novel, you cannot write fiction, or even a short story. Short stories are actually more difficult, I think. You cannot write them without a framework. So you have the framework, you think of a beginning, a middle, and end. If you want, you can start from the middle and then go back to the beginning and then proceed to the end. You know, this technique is called the flashback technique. Flashback technique. You go forward and you go back in stories, and then towards the end, you sum it all up. Now, how do you go about it? You have a story in mind, and you keep thinking of the story, and yes, it comes from your world, from the world in which you live. Because if it did not come from the world in which you live, it would not be realistic. If you're writing fantasy, if you're writing stories that are science fiction, that's different. But if you are writing something that is related to the world in which you live, then you need to be observant. You need to look around at characters. You need to see their eccentricities, right? So see the eccentricities, and you have to be interested in their stories. You have to be interested in the stories. If you're not interested, you will just rattle off a story which will not hold somebody else's interest, right? So you have to be involved in what you're writing. Otherwise, your story probably will not reach out to the audience. Then you have to keep in mind what is your target audience. So what is your target audience? Are you targeting young school children? Are you targeting the young adult? Are you targeting women readers? Or are you targeting the corporate sector? With that in mind, then you have some kind of direction. This is where I want to go, and this is the story I wish to narrate. Okay. So then, who is going to be your speaker? You know, every narrative has a speaker. And the speaker is not necessarily the author. Like you are a young person, say you're a young girl about 19, 20, and you want to write a story about an old woman or an old man. So who is going to be your speaker? Your speaker is not necessarily you. You have to empathize. You have to empathize with your character. There is something which in literature we call negative capability. There's nothing negative about it, but you negate your own personality and you get into the character that you are talking about, that you are empathizing with, even if it is a bad character, mind you. Even if it is an evil character, you have to try and see how their mind works. Because if that empathy is not there, if that negative capability is not there, then you will not be presenting a convincing character, and then somewhere your fiction will fall short, right? I could go on and on about the craft of fiction because I'm a teacher like my other fellow speakers out here, but let me keep it short. I will focus on the second part of the second question raised by Vivek, and that is autobiography. How much does your personal experience come into your work? See, we all have stories in our lives. We all have experiences that are worth relating. But sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that my experiences are the best and everybody would be interested in them. Everybody would be interested in them only if you can get out of your skin and reach out to the public. So you have to make an attempt to move from the personal to the public. If it's all about me and my this and my that and my child and my husband and my job and so on, believe me, it might be written well, but it will have a very limited audience. Maybe your family, maybe your close friends, they will say, very good. And you will say, I've done an excellent piece of work. But the point is, will it reach out to the world beyond your immediate circle, right? So autobiography does come into your work because there are so many experiences that you have that leave a scar in your mind, a scar in your heart, and you have to narrate them. But you have to distance yourself. You have to distance yourself. It's called the aesthetic distance. Distance yourself from the experience so that it doesn't become all a whining and moaning and, oh, I suffered this and so said this to me and I wept and I lost my best friend or father or whatever, and I had this sorrow. Everyone has these experiences, mind you. Treat them objectively, treat them from a distance, and analyze them. Analyze them. So try and erase your own personality, even if you are writing about your own experiences, and try and reach out to the world. Now, what about the characters around you? If you are observant, you will notice their eccentricities. And all those eccentricities in you, in me, they make us what we are. They give us our peculiarity. They give us our special characteristics, which differentiate me from my neighbor this side or that side, right? So be very observant, and all those little observations that you make go into your work, mind you. They go into your work, so you may borrow a character who works with you or who sits with you, but you don't have to tell that person's story. The story may be something else. So in fiction, when you're writing fiction, there is something like condensation that takes place, and also dispersion. Condensation is when you have lots of characters, you take one characteristic from here, one attribute from here, and you make your own character. And the other is dispersion, that you have one character, but the character is so strong. The character is so strong that you feel that, this will be dominated by this one character. It might get boring. So let me divide this character into 4 different characters. So you split that character into 4 characters. I tried this technique once, and it worked. instead of being dominated by just one character, then there were 2 or 3 characters, you know, who had different attributes which were related and yet different. So these are techniques. Mind you, you can write a story, you can tell a story, but to be a good storyteller, to be a good story writer, you need to know something about the techniques of it. It doesn't happen just like that. It doesn't happen just like that. You're not a born person, you know, a born storyteller. There is a line in W.B. Yeats. A line may take us hours, maybe, but if it does not seem a moment's thought, all our stitching and unstitching has been naught. So you have to put in hard work, mind you. You have to put in hard work, but the end result should be spontaneous. It should be racy. It should be the sort that holds the reader's attention. And if you've done that, you are a successful writer. So with that, I'm going to hand over the mic back to Vivek. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very lucid. I'm going to request Nilkamal ji and ma'am to speak about the same topics and then come to their own work specifically and also read from their work at the end, a couple of pages each.
Okay, I can see that we are, partially making this into a sort of a classroom because I can see a lot of students here. And apart from students, I think what we perhaps do have are a lot of incipient authors, people who, are trying to write and hoping to write. What I will try to do is not to talk to you about how it should be done. Maybe I'll just tell you about how I did do it in terms of both my novels, very briefly though. Because I think, finally, we each of us have to find our own path. There's no codified path that you can actually take. And when it comes to writing of a novel, if I, try to break it up, the process, if I try to break it up, it's not just inspiration. I mean, it's not a God-given thing. It's not, the God coming down and writing your text for you. It is not that kind of inspiration only. Partially it is that, partially, as Manju said, it is a lot of hard work. It's about sitting down and applying yourself to it and not really moving from your seat and just, as a lot of authors have said, putting the glue on the seat of your pants and applying it to the seat of your chair. That's how you have to. In fact, I know Rushdie, I was reading his, his biography when he was in hiding. He also says, I would get up in the morning in my pajamas, I would sit down, and each time I had the urge to get up, I would say, sit down, don't get up. So it is hard work. It's a combination of the two. And if I try to, mine was not inspirational either. It was, there's this love for words that one has, love for ideas that one has. So if I try to break up fiction, if I try to break up the process of writing, perhaps to me, I'm sure that it works differently for everyone, but for me it works in terms of a setting. To me the setting is important. To me the play of ideas is important. To me the play of language is also very important. And then of course the characters. I think preeminently for both my novels, the setting became a sort of a character in the way that I wrote. My first book, The Patiala Quartet, people say that your setting should be, if you particularize your setting, like the novel said, The Patiala Quartet. A lot of people said, don't call it The Patiala Quartet, because then you are pinning it down to a particular place. And if you have a setting that's abstracted, then it sort of perhaps would appeal to many more people. In this instance, you're saying the Patiala Quartet. But to me, actually, the setting remains a very interesting place. And for instance, in Ludhiana, I think a lot of it you have to experience. What you write, you have to experience. The first novel is autobiographical most of the times, but it's never, a one-to-one in terms of your life. You're picking up somebody's nose, somebody else's ear, somebody else's eye, and putting it together. It's a reconfiguration. It's a fashioning of the raw material, really, of your life. It comes from your life, right? And when you experience life, for instance, when I wrote my second novel, which is based in Ludhiana, what I found really interesting was, you pick up little tidbits. I don't know if you've heard of the Daresi ground in Ludhiana. And, people said, this Daresi ground, why is it called the Daresi ground? Somebody said that, the British used to line up the Indian troops over there and then tell their officers, give them a dressing down, give them a dressing down. The dressing down became the Daresi ground. You know, so there's a lot of little stuff that you actually pick up, and every setting has its own persona as well. So I think for me, the play of persona and ideas is really what worked as a combination for really both of my novels. And if I think of ideas, you know, I think that a piece of fiction or a piece of art has to have some sort of interaction with its social setting. I mean, it's not something that is in the air, up in some kind of an ivory tower. It's something that comes from life, and it has perhaps a critique of life. You know, I mean, so if you write about something, I would say love without criticism, you will create a fuzzy sort of an image. If you have criticism without love, you will have a distorted sort of an image. And so I think the combination is a tightrope walk, and it's always, to me, the setting is important. I mean, I would have to have my novel based in Punjab. But then, writing about Punjab, I would want to be able to be critical of, you know, for instance, I wouldn't approve of the Khalistanis, right? And I would want to be able to say that in my fiction, not overtly, not as a kind of a, you know, slogan where I'm sort of saying down with Khalistanis, but, you know, I would like to be able to say that it, in a sense, tore asunder the fabric of my society. And those are the kind of things that I would like to be able to say when I'm writing a piece of fiction. But when I say them, I have to say them out of a sense of love, that I love Punjab, that it means a lot to me, but yet I want to be able to critique it. So really, these are the elements that have played into the way that I have written. But I'm sure that each of you have to find your own route. There is no really given path that you can actually take. So maybe with that I can... All right. This is my book is called Remember to Forget, and it's based in Ludhiana, and it's sort of talks about, it's the time frame is really early 90s, when terrorism is just sort of fading away, and it has left its mark on society in terms of, you know, I mean, if you look at Punjab in the old days, Hindus, Sikhs, that was not an issue. I mean, one grew up, you know, with people, and one found that one hadn't even asked them, what religion is it that you practice? You know, I mean, that was really not an issue. That was not part of the discourse at all. But when we are looking at Punjab, there is this, you know, now these are the issues that become part of people's psyche. So this is based in the early 90s, and it raises issues of how a society really deals with, you know, this kind of divisive tendencies, as also, you know, all the other elements that have formed part of the, you know, sort of progress, or progress within quotes, because the commercialization, etc. Anyway, here I'm looking at this particular character who cannot sleep at night. And he cannot sleep at night because he's had an encounter, which is what I'll read out to you. He's had an encounter, and that's the encounter that haunts him for the rest of his life in his sleep. Right? He had stepped off, he's a character called Tejpal. He had stepped off the train at the old Delhi railway station in his red turban. There was a press of cabbies vying to relieve him of his bag and herd him to their taxis. He had instinctively picked one with a red turban. "Where to, Sardarji?" asked the taxi driver. "Janakpuri," he said, which was where his company had a branch office. He's just traveled into Delhi. He's, you know, so he's going to his company office. It was very early in the morning. On the way, there was a campfire in the middle of the road. Or so it seemed. Furniture was piled up 20 feet high and was burning rapidly. Black smoke curled into the white, wispy clouds in the sky, dirtying them. "Some sort of clearing up?" he asked the driver. "This is a rowdy area, lots of gundagardi. Could be anything."
Even if they are only trying to warm up a cold November morning, why in the middle of the road? As they skirted the volcanic mountain of furniture, they saw a human leg sticking out from the bottom of the heap. Told you this was a bad area, said the taxi driver. They shuddered and drove past. Amidst the smell of burning wood, a fleeting smell, quickly submerged, of burning flesh. A sudden waft again, and then they had moved on. Tejpal washed and bathed in the camp office, then read the paper which was inked black with news of the Prime Minister's assassination by her Sikh bodyguards. He contemplated a while on how the commonplace eludes extraordinary lives even in death. Dying in bed of old age would be far too tame an end for the daughter of the first Prime Minister of independent India. But he had never liked her and could not say that he was sorry. There was something to be said for a life that was routine. You wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, at least no one thinks of gunning you down. Amid such philosophical thoughts on the ironies of life, he called for a cab to take him to the station to catch the 11:30 to Gwalior. Come and get it, each of the drivers said when he sent his office peon to the taxi stand. None would come to the building. He was surprised at the sudden intransigence of taxi drivers. He walked to the stand carrying his overnight bag, the picture of normality beginning to curl at the edges. A busload of ruffians went by. Sardar, Sardar, maro, maro, kill him, they shouted, pointing to him. He gawked. Just when he had thought the ordinariness of his life was his armor. They could not be serious. They were just a bunch of hooligans getting a laugh out of the stupid look on his face. He waited for the bus to be on its way, but it stopped. And then they were streaming out, armed with clubs and swords. Maro, maro. There was an explosion of blood inside his head. He scurried into a by-lane and ran wildly. Like a mouse, he thought. He did not look back, as that would have slowed him down, but concentrated instead on getting away from the hungry-eyed mob. That was the stuff his subsequent dreams were made of. The maniacal running, the attempt to keep his feet quiet even as he ran, willing them to fall softly on the tarmac, hiding behind doorways, cautiously peeping round a corner before plunging on. He had run through a number of by-lanes when he finally felt he had outrun danger. In the distance, he saw a small taba at the foot of an ancient banyan tree. An old Sardar with a flowing white beard was kindling a tandoor, putting small pieces of wood into it and occasionally stirring its depths with a fire iron. Tejpal waited for the heavy pounding of his heart to subside, for his legs to solidify once again into bone and muscle, before he made his way there. The Sardar was a kindly-looking old man. Maybe it was the sudden antithesis he offered, but even now Tejpal thought of him as the most handsome man ever. He went up to him and asked for some tea. Babaji, how long have you been running this place? He was making small talk as the nearly viscous mixture of water, milk, sugar, and tea leaves gurgled in the weather-beaten pot, reassuring him that the ordinariness of life was still intact. Been over 40 years now, said the old man, as he poured the contents of the pot into a glass through a tea-blackened sieve. Tejpal rubbed his hands together in anticipation of tea, and also as a closure to the cat and mouse game. He had just curled his cold fingers around the hot glass of tea when the mob appeared around the corner once again. He thumped his glass down on the table. The tea sloshed all over his hand, scalding it, but he ran. As he looked back from the head of the lane, he saw that the mob had caught hold of the old man and was swinging him into the fire. That is where his visual frame froze forever.
Dr. Suchita Malik, who's written 2 books on life in the civil services, that is being married to a very senior civil services officer, life as it exists in the civil services, and also a book recently on Indian women and inspirational women. So we'd like to talk about your work.
Thank you, Vivek. Yeah, it's working. Yeah. To be the last one to speak because number one, everything has been spoken. Number two, I got so carried away by listening to these writers and whatever they had to say that Vivek, I'm sorry, but I've forgotten the questions. So anyway, yeah. Well, you have heard about the art and craft of fiction, how much of it is art and how much of it is craft. Well, I thought, first of all of you are students. You are here this lovely morning. You want to hear. So I presume somewhere in your heart of hearts, you are all aspiring writers. You want to write. And sitting there on the other side of the fence, you must be thinking, oh, these writers are great. You know, what is it that makes them different? It must be very difficult to write. I'm sure you must be getting bogged down by these questions. We were all also at one time thought the same. But I think it will be more useful to you if I talk about my journey as a writer, how I stumbled upon writing. I consider myself a writer by chance. Not that I didn't want to be a writer, but started with, well, you have a family, you have a career, you have a social life, you have everything, and deep down somewhere, you want to be a writer also, and you have to find a time for doing whatever you want to do. So when I was a student, I started in a very humble manner, say by writing letters to the editor. Maybe I'm giving you some clues. So, when the first letter to the editor appeared, well, I was thrilled. It's a thrill to see your name in print. And the first one led to the other one, and the other one. And then, you start getting more ambitious. Then, of course, when I say I'm a writer by chance, I'll skip a number of years in between, and I'll tell you, I became a writer of Miggles and travelogues. And how Miggle, I'm sure all of you know, Miggle is a small write-up on the editorial page where you can take liberties with your creative imagination. But for me, it was more of a catharsis. Catharsis in the sense, it was an expression of my pent-up feelings. The first Miggle was published sometime in 1992, and it was called the Peace Accord. It wasn't the peace accord of the India-Lanka agreement. It was a peace accord with my husband because, as Vivek has said, my husband is a civil servant, and in the first initial years, I picked up my luggage 11 times in a span of 9 years, and I was very angry. I was very upset. It was like relocating after every 6 to 7 months. So I was so angry one day that I just sat and I couldn't have shouted at anybody else. So I just wrote a middle piece and I sent it to the Tribune. And those were the days when you would just write it and you would just send it by post by putting a 25 paisa ticket. And it got, just after 4 or 5 days, it just got published. And the kind of, your response from your friends and all, and that set me on the path to writing. First Miggle led to the second one, the third one, the fourth one. Well, it set a chain of events. And then for a year, we went abroad. We went to Scotland as a part of my husband's official assignment. And there, well, it was a new world. It was exposure to a different culture, to more beautiful scenic spots. I came back from there and I started writing travelogues. Well, a number of them appeared. I was very happy. And, well, maybe I would have continued like that. But then again, well, since Vivek has put me or said that civil service thing, so I have to refer to it again and again. And after 20 years or so, my husband thought of going to the government of India. And here I was teaching in government college. I stayed away from my family for a year till I thought, well, I couldn't stay. I didn't want to do that. I took leave and I went to Government of India. And for first 6 months, I was very unhappy. I was thinking, well, here I had a small job and I don't even have that now. It was a sort of an identity crisis. So I went to the legendary Khushwant Singh, because I was doing a research project on the man of letters, and I showed him my medals, about 70 and all, and I asked him his advice for an aspiring writer. He said, "Bahut likh liye medals, write a novel." I said, "Novel? Oh my God, it must be a daunting task." So he said, "No, most of the writers' initial first novels are semi-autobiographical. Think about it, shouldn't be very difficult." So I came back. I used to go to Nehru Museum Library. I used to sit there, work on my research project. I forgot all about my research project. He had set me on a path, and I kept on thinking, why not? Everybody talks about civil servants, about bureaucracy. It's a much maligned lot. And I said, well, everybody talks from the officer's point of view. Why not? Let me write about my experiences as an IAS officer's wife. Let me put the other side of the picture also in view. So that's how my first novel, Indian Mem Sahib, was born. The idea was born. It came out. And that led to the sequel of it, which was called Mem Sahib's Chronicles. It gives a peep into the well-guarded lives of the civil servants. It presents everything from a positive point of view. I'm sure all of you know, everything has two aspects. So it's a writer's task to highlight whichever one you want. After 2 novels, I thought I was getting labeled as a writer of bureaucracy or civil servants. So I wanted to diverge. I wanted to take up another subject. So that's how I chose the 3rd novel. It's called, just came out in the beginning of this year. It's called Women Extraordinaire. Extraordinary women. Well, these women are not extraordinary. They are ordinary women. They are born in ordinary circumstances, but it's their choices in life, it's their out-of-the-box thought process, it's their grit, it's their determination, it's their grace under pressure, when under pressure, their extraordinary choices for ordinary situations that makes them extraordinary. The novel spans about a century. Starts somewhere about 1900, goes up to the modern century. We have 5 women. We start with Subhagi and Kaushalya and Gelibai and Shobhana and Nayantara. I don't want to tell you the story because I don't want to take the interest right away. They are all ordinary women, but what is it that makes them extraordinary? So for that, you'll have to read the novel. That is my journey, students, as a writer. I told all this to you purposely because that will give you some idea. It's not difficult to be a writer. You've already heard about about the art and craft of fiction. Well, I will say one thing, that, you know, the facts are all strewn around you. It's around you. It is a creative writer's imagination. What you pick it up, how you present it. Of course, it is, you have inspiration, but there is craft also. Craft gives you the flexibility of time. You can start anywhere. You can go up to anywhere. The craft gives you various techniques, as one has been pointed out, the flashback technique. You also have the stream of consciousness technique, where you can go on, you know, back and forth. So all these, it is the craft which gives you the liberty to make the character what you want him or her to be. So the flexibility of time, flexibility of space, flexibility of narratology, all these are included in the art and craft of fiction, where a fiction writer picks up the facts, weaves it with his or her creative imagination, and presents before you as a work of art, which you all know as fiction. I think I'd like to stop there and maybe read a page from it. Yeah. I'll read something, a description of nature. That's how my novel starts. Spring was particularly beautiful in Dera Ismail Khan that year. Tender leaves were breaking out on the branches of trees, their redness lending radiance to the landscape so typical of the season. Rich flowers on the mango trees filled the air with an enchanting aroma and augured a beautiful crop in the days to come. Groves of mango trees called amrai, situated at some distance from the pavements, offered opportunities to passers-by to relax in the shade and soak in the subtle fragrance of the bloom with the breeze. The full-throated coo-coo of the ecstatic koel lent the music that was enough to send them into deep slumber in the lazy, elongated afternoons. While the mango trees make their presence known in the spacious bungalows of zamindars and the affluent, the periphery of the inbuilt roads, the corners at crossings, and the long stretches of the front area looked bright with a sea of golden yellow petals hanging from the branches of thick trees. The amaltas was raining golden leaves from making the dark green of the flora run for cover. The slightest rustle of wind was enough to make the petals drop, and the earth was carpeted with blazing yellow, with spots of green peeping through. The spectacle invited many discerning eyes and caused people to stop for minutes on end to enjoy the bounty of nature. Soon summer came. Leaves began turning dark green and the flowers into fruit. The area was replete with a rich wheat crop, and the menfolk seemed proud of their achievements. These were men of understanding, skillful and hardworking, and were content with what they acquired through sheer love of labor. The landscape all around was one of plenty. The fertile earth, the green foliage, the trees laden with fruit, and the sweet smell of ripeness pervading the atmosphere. The sound of honeybees reverberated with strange flurry of activity. Their artful skill, combined with the bounty of nature, produced the sweetest nectar in the world of creation that was inimitable for mere mortals. The golden wheat crop, standing across the vast stretches of land, matched the golden hue of the equally maturing rays of sun. The time was just ripe for harvesting, ushering in a milestone in the ever-changing cycle of nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard from some very intense writers, some very creative work having been done. I'm going to talk about my own second book for a few minutes. And this is Dubey Ji Bounces Back, which is currently available on Flipkart, Amazon, and bookstores because it was released just 1.5 months ago. I write humor, so I'm a little different in that sense. I write light humor, and my inspiration for humor comes from real life. As the worthy speakers said, everything around you is actually potentially worthy of being written about. This session, we could write a biddle on this session. Some of you look alert, some look sleepy, not so sleepy. Some look, a little tired. Maybe yesterday you slept very late. Kids these days are on WhatsApp till 3 a.m. So you know what happens? You can write about any situation. So I'm going to read just 2 pages from Dubey Ji Bounces Back. And this is where Raghav Dubey, who undergoes a life-changing moment, where he's a timid, shy guy and he's trying to come out of his timidity. And he's trying to become a little more confident, especially in the company of the ladies. And he finds love in the form of Avni Singh, but he's unable to propose to her or tell her that he loves her, and how he's in that situation when these couple of pages come about. Dubey Ji left for Mumbai after having met the doctors once more, and having convinced himself that all was well with his favorite relative. Uncle Ji gave him a warm send-off from the door of his room, and told him to propose to Avni forthwith, or else he would come to Mumbai and do it on his nephew's behalf. But Raghav assured him that he was capable of doing it on his own. Am I really capable of it though? Was the question that haunted him inside. He would find out in the days to come. Avni was on his mind inexorably and completely. Even air hostesses did not interest him anymore. The flight home was quick and without incident. Dubeji pondered once again over the developments of the past few months that had transformed his hitherto staid life. The Kopika blow had almost killed him, and he had come out of that episode a new man. Avni had come into his life like a flower in spring, blooming gloriously. Uncle Phulchand's illness had come as a great shock. Dubeji's work at Bonnie Bank had become more important to him in recent months, and he was looking forward to fresh challenges once he returned to his own city. But he had an appointment to keep first. He took a cab straight from the airport to the headquarters of Bonnie Bank. The chairman welcomed him with his customary silent laughter and a warm hug. Mr. Chandrasekharan had not been trifling when he had told Dubeji on the flight that he was welcome to walk into his office anytime. He had responded favorably and without hesitating to the telephonic request that Dubeji had made to him from the airport. My boy Dube, I've done a check and found that everyone's full of appreciation for you. And there seems to have been a significant upswing in your output after some silly accident that you had. Remarkable, my boy. Well done. Dubeji smiled at his chairman's remark. The spot where Mrs. Kopika had walloped him still hurt. And he had an instinctive urge at that moment to feel it with his hand, but decided to wait till he got home. The chairman waved Dubeji to an uncomfortable looking chair in front of a huge desk and parked himself on a cushy chair behind it. So how was the Delhi trip? Found any pretty girls there? Delhi girls are gorgeous. Dubeji went pink in the face, and he knew it. His cheeks and ears felt warm. Sir, was all he could say. I'm going to stop there. It goes on to be a little more funny, but I think we're going to, you can clap for that. Thank you for being here. A big thanks to the three ladies. They spoke very eloquently and they are very good writers. And thank you very much for listening so intently. Okay, thank you.
We now request Mr. Mithil Dixit, Chairman, Aadhav Foundation, to hand over the token of appreciation to Professor Neel Kamal Puri, Professor Manju Jaitka, Dr. Suchita Malik, and Mr. Vivek Atre. Thank you very much.